Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about bamboo cutting part 2. So last time we talked about actually cutting the bamboo. Today we're going to talk about how to set things up and maybe a few things for you kind of know beforehand as you're kind of prepping to do some bamboo cutting. Also last time I mentioned like how to get ready to actually bamboo cut. So in terms of like using a metal sword, cutting angles, all that fun stuff. Make sure that you drill all of those things before. So let's actually talk about the equipment. So this is one aspect of swordsmanship that has a little bit of that, I don't call it gatekeeping because it's sort of gatekeeping, but a little bit different in the sense that you do need to fit a lot of criteria in order to do this. So one of them is just regional, right? So some places just don't have bamboo to cut, or it's not the right kind of bamboo. Right, so some bamboo is just like always very, very thin. Not really going to be very helpful to cut that. I mean, you can like bundle it up, cut it, get a good idea that way. But it is a very regional thing. I know some places, at least in the U.S., are actively like trying to destroy bamboo places because it is a weed and it's very tough. So I understand it. So just from a regional perspective, it can be difficult for you to procure bamboo before you do anything, which isn't fun, right? Because the alternatives to bamboo just aren't as good, right? So some people cut like postal tubing, right? Not great for the sword, and also it's susceptible to tearing instead of cutting. Some people cut pool noodles, right? Which is good for speed, but not the strength needed to cut. There are also things called plamboo, so plastic bamboo, which has the same vice as cutting pool noodles, where like the materials aren't recyclable. Like you cut it and you're kind of, that's a one and done sort of thing, which I myself am not all on board with. So if you are able to get bamboo, awesome. You'll be able to do this more often than probably a lot of people. But there's one thing to keep in mind is when, or at least where to get bamboo. Another thing to keep in mind is you do want relatively fresh bamboo when you cut it. It does dry out. It does become much more brittle. I don't say brittle, but it becomes less clean of a cut, even if you're cutting well, if you're cutting old bamboo, right? So you do want it to be relatively fresh, even if it is going to be a couple days, maybe even a week. Maybe cover it with a damp towel wherever you have it in storage, so it retains a lot of its moisture. That's going to, hopefully it's not going to like have a lot of mold and stuff like that, but that is something I want you to keep in mind, is you do want relatively fresh bamboo when you cut it. Another downside is the actual sword itself, right? So the other pieces of equipment, you can kind of wing it to a certain degree, right? So like I use a Christmas tree stand in order to hold my bamboo. There are actual like bamboo holding sets, right? But so long as it's able to withstand like that movement, again, Christmas trees generally are able to hold that up, or the stands are able to hold that up, that's fine. But the sword, unfortunately, is a major bottleneck for a lot of people, understandably, right? So, especially in the United States, where like you can get like a $20 sword and they say it's razor sharp, don't cut with that, please. You're just going to get hurt. So the idea is you have to find a reputable cutting sword. Right? So yes, you're going to be able to get things from an anonymous, massive corporation who just sells things without looking into it. However, it will be good to do a lot of research and find out what really works. And unfortunately, that usually is going to be a more expensive weapon. So just so you have an idea behind this, you can get an okay-ish one. I don't want to necessarily put my face behind that. For like $250, $300 more or so like that. You can get a much better one for $600 or something like that. These guys are a couple thousand, right? They're also made by the Federation. Now, as you can probably tell, I have some gripes with the Federation. but the jingums that they make, so the sharp swords, are very top notch, right? So if you are a member of the Federation, I shy away from saying it's worth getting a jingum because they are several $1,000s, but they are very, very good swords. So that was a less fun part of the video, right? That was me complaining about things, right? But things I just want you to be aware of, right? So like when you have a student or you're working with a master or something like that that doesn't cut bamboo, they might have absolutely legitimate reasons not to be doing that. They might be living in a place they don't have it, they don't have a proper sharp sword. They might have a, maybe even like the state or country they live in don't want you to do it. So all of these things are legitimate, so just be aware of that when you're working with someone who has or has not worked with bamboo cutting. So let's actually set up our bamboo, take a couple of swings, and see where we're vibing after that. Let's talk about actually setting up, right? So first thing to do, especially if you're new, but even if you're not, put your sharp sword down, right? So when you're putting a sharp weapon against the wall, you actually want the blade towards the wall. Normally, you want the blade towards yourself just because out of respect and stuff like that. But from a safety perspective, you actually want the blade up against the wall like so. Hopefully you can see that in post. So, first thing, make sure your station is clear. Second thing, make sure you have the bamboo that is, again, appropriate for your skill level. One thing for you to note is, I'll move this closer and creepily see how close I can be to the camera. Look at that. So notice that there is this white portion that's underneath the node. That is the direction you want to go. As opposed to if we had it the other way, this means, yeah, there you can sort of see it up there. So this would mean that the newer portions are at the bottom, which you don't want. So this is a good proportion. See the white line below the node? That's a good way to start. So from here, this is a Christmas tree stand, right? So there are actually stands made to hold bamboo. I recommend that you have something that has 2 levels of support. So in this case, this one does. I'm very happy with it. So the idea is you want to make sure that's all the way at the bottom. I'm not going to narrate how to do this specific one, but you want to make sure it's actually hitting the bottom. This one has a bunch of V's they have to kind of contend with, but make sure it's on the bottom. It is easier if you have a light source, but my light source is filming. Okay, so it's on the bottom. Tighten the bottom first. So I'm going to have it a little bit too tight. You're going to hear a slight creak maybe, right? And then tighten the top. Now, if you're a professional, you're not going to have it creak. But I am nervous. So always actually check it with a little bit here. Notice also the different types of holders you can have, right? This one is wide this way, but short this way. So this is going to absorb this way quite well, not this way very well. So we have our bamboo. Again, test the side to side. Because we're going to be cutting this way, I want this to be less resistant than this way. More resistant this way as opposed to this way, right? So from here, I realize you couldn't see it in post, but notice that the blade is up against the wall here. Going to come to a kneel, pick it up, and sheath, or at least tuck the sword into your sash, right? From here, we're going to have that ceremony that we had initially, right? Where we're here, we're at ready, we await for someone like the judge to be like, hey, you can start now. And then you're like, yeah, and draw a defense. Newbies can get your distance, see how you feel about that, cut and reset. Actually, side note before I even cut this, right? So when you're training for this, if you're training for a test, train the actual angles for that test, right? But always have some reason to be cutting. So for example, I'm going to start with my strong cut, which is actually my left diagonal. For whatever reason, that's my best one, or one of my best ones. This one, the uppercut from this side, is not my best one. So I'm going to embarrass myself on the camera and try to do my weak side coming in from this side. This uppercut is my go-to. Like you can even trim the top if you want to with an uppercut. However, yeah, so always have a reason to be practicing as opposed to merely making it muscle memory. But with that, right? So from here, set prepare, over to the side, cut. If you want to, you can kind of make this into like a continual motion, right? I'm going to pause here. I'm going to step back, prepare, right? From this one, I like to be in the sodosei. This is also what Master Laura mentioned. Sodosei, you're going to kick that heel back as you throw the cut. This is my weak side, so let's find out together how bad it is, right? So from here, stepping off to the side, extending your heel back, cut, and draw back this way. So from here, if you mess up as I did, you're going to acknowledge it, chakam, put your sword away, and then wait for some sort of acknowledgement, right? So this is actually a really good example of what bamboo can tell you, because it tells me, it tells me a lot, right? So first of all, a couple things you can note with this one. Usually if you fail at something, like if you don't cut through something, there is a possibility if it cracks through there, there is no point in you continuing past that point. There's no reason, right? Because even if you do cut well, pieces are going to go flying, it's not safe, and it's not going to let you pass the test, right? But actually, I'm going to move you closer so you can actually take a nicer look at this. Yes, bask in my failure. So the idea here, I'm also going to do this with my sword, which is a safer use, and it's also Japanese, so be careful where you flaunt that. So notice actually my cutting angle here was, as I warned you in part 1, right? It's almost a cross cut. In fact, I don't know how that happened. This is more of a diagonal cut going this way, right? So this is a good example of why just cross cuts in general are not going to work, right? Even if you had a decent amount of power, you can muscle your way through a lot of the fibers, but there's going to be a point at which the bamboo is like, no, I'm going to take over, and it's just going to like, stop all of your forward momentum. It's kind of cool. We can kind of see like the mist from the bamboo. That's kind of cool. You have a little bit of piece of the papery kind of thing. Anyway, so a few things to learn from this, right? So you can learn your cutting angle, right? So it did cut, which means I wasn't too close per se, but the angle was very bad, and this kind of demonstrates what happens. Also note, while we're this close, right? Again, always aiming between the nodes for your cut, right? You can cut through the node, but look at all that extra stuff, and it's going to break the rhythm of the fibers as well. That's going to be very hard for you to cut through. You can do it if you're fast and more powerful on that side. But yeah, so notice again, angle, notice again, try to learn from your mistakes as opposed to me be like, oh, that bamboo was just too thick. It wasn't too thick, it was fine, my technique was bad. So now you get to see that for all the world to see. So let's actually talk about how to get this out. So if you're at a test, most likely someone else is going to take the bamboo out for you. We're not doing that, right? So again, same thing. Take your sword out, blade against the wall, coming to a kneel, put it down, and being good, right? So we're just going to do the opposite of what we just did, right? So now, if I did actually cut down to here, a good practice for me, so in this case it doesn't make sense for me to do it with this one, but imagining that this is the piece that's still in there, something I recommend that you do is actually gently cover the top of it as you come over to undo the piece. A couple of reasons for that. Now, the more dramatic one is you fall and you impale yourself. 2 out of 10, not great, right? So versus, another thing is also just accidentally like grazing like your cheek against like the fibers. Uncomfortable, not lethal, but not comfortable. But so it's just general good practice to kind of cover the top of it as you work the rest of it. But this is tall enough, so all we're going to do is just make sure that we don't accidentally like headbutt it, and release the top, release the bottom, it wasn't in properly. Release it, and again, be careful with this. Don't like wave it around, but you're adults, you know how to engage with this. So reclaim all the pieces and then move on. And one thing while I'm here, I'm going to show you, I know I showed you this in the previous video. This is what I do if I have a blade, live or otherwise, that I won't be using both my hands as I move around. So one thing you can do, don't recommend, is this, and pick things up, because the moment you bend over, it might come out. Same thing with a lot of people do this, less likely, but still capable of like falling out. So I'm going to be, this is actually what my Kendo teacher, so Isabella Trench Sensei, does. This guy. This, again, the angle of the scabbard is going to keep it planted in the sword. So from here, I can start to like gather materials and use both of my hands. This is also good if you're a teacher and you want to like manually, like physically change your student's posture or something like that. It's also a good way to do it. But yeah, so actually this is a good idea to re-demonstrate, or something that will be in the future video. Again, when you're taking something out, again, make sure you're covering that piece so you don't accidentally like headbutt it, as people recreationally do famously, right? So let's move on from there. Again, probably something that you naturally know, but when you're moving something heavy like this, again, this is lead, painted lead. So make sure that you're actually using your whole body to move it, right? So I like to just squat, use my core to move it. Not something that I expect is new information to anyone out there, but keep that in mind. And then the glorious part of all martial arts, cleaning the mat. So I recommend push broom, highly recommend vacuum if you have a vacuum. I'm not gonna make you watch me sweep this, but I recommend that you have a vacuum beforehand before you start all this fun endeavor. So allegedly we've cleaned up shop, right? The only thing left to do is to make sure your sword is still okay. Hopefully it's better than okay, it's still fine, right? So something I highly recommend that you use, and this is also something I highly recommend you use for all of your steel weapons anyway, is to actually oil it, right? Now you could be a hyper-traditionalist and have that little powder bell, wipe it down, use like a very specific oil to do it. For a lot of us, that's kind of a little bit over the top. So something that I actually recommend that you use are actually REM oil wipes. Not sponsored, this is the one I use. I know it might seem a little excessive to say this is how you wipe. I'm going to actually introduce a little bit of how to handle a sword as well, to kind of give you an idea, right? So now this is my sword, right? But especially if you're using someone else's sword, you want to show the utmost respect. So show the utmost respect anyway, but here, right? So we have a live weapon, right? So I recommend break the seal. Again, holding it with your dominant hand, bracing the back of the sword, of the saya, pull it out, mostly pulling the saya away and moving the blade as little as possible, and put the scabbard down. Then from here, two hands, just make sure you don't have any damage to the sword. I do have damage to the sword, but that's because I cut lead with it. So before this video, actually, I think about a year ago, I actually did cut the stand because I was trying to do an uppercut. Just examine the sword just to make sure nothing has been damaged. Then move on to actually cleaning the weapon and all that fun stuff. The exciting things of YouTube, right? So make sure, this should really go without saying, wipe from the back of the ridge of the sword, not the front. I know there's a lot of, I'm saying things I'm probably going to regret later. And if you do try to clean the front, clamp on the front, like not on the blade. Again, be smart, people. But be very, very gentle as you wipe the edges of the wedge there. Right. Again, this is just good for you to do with a steel weapon anyway, just to give it a nice oil, just so it doesn't have any rust, and also just makes the sword happier, right? So from here, obviously put your wipe down, give it another inspection, just make sure everything is good, honky, and dory. Then grab your scabbard. Again, bracing it by the back, let the tip rest on into the koichi, right into the mouth, and then bring the scabbard in. What I do, which is not necessarily traditional, hand on top, hand on bottom, just give it a little bit of a push, just to make sure it's really sealed. And then just make sure everything else is good. I do recommend actually if you're letting your students use your sword as well, use a wet hand towel or something like that, and just kind of gently scrub, very, very gently scrub the tsukaito, so the wrapping, just so you have less of other people's skin on your sword, but obviously always have that thumb on the guard. Mine is quite sealed. It's sealed, right? Right. But that was probably a bad idea for you to do. But anyway, so make sure that you hold your sword with a lot of care. But actually with that, so your sword's taken care of, your room's taken care of, make sure everything else is, again, all good. But with that, we've done a little bit of prep for bamboo, right? So take a look at this video and the previous one, and just kind of cycle through those, kind of get a good vibe of how to set things up and do our cuts. But with that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Really stay safe, because I don't. Sharp swords. Anyway. Haidong!